What if I told you there was a castle in medieval Europe that defied the very laws of nature itself? A fortress that would stand magnificently during the day, only to crumble into nothing but dust and bone fragments every single night for over 2 centuries. Today, we're diving into one of history's most disturbing architectural mysteries, the story of Chateau Eftimir, a castle that became a monument to madness, death, and an obsession that consumed an entire bloodline. In the rolling hills of what is now eastern France, near the border with Germany, there once stood a castle that challenged everything we think we know about construction, physics, and human sanity. The locals called it many names: Chateau de la Malediction, Schloss Vergenglitch, but most historians know it as Chateau Ephemère. For 237 years, from 1218 to 1455, this castle followed the same impossible pattern. Every dawn, it would rise from the earth like a phoenix from ashes. Every dusk, it would collapse into dust. But here's where the story gets truly disturbing. The castle wasn't built from stone or wood like every other medieval fortress. Archaeological evidence suggests it was constructed entirely from human remains: bones, teeth, hair, and something the medieval chroniclers described as the tears of the damned made solid. The man responsible for this architectural nightmare was Count Aldric de Montmorency, a nobleman who lost his mind after watching his entire family die from a mysterious plague that swept through the region in 1217. His wife, his 7 children, his parents, his siblings, all dead within a month. But Aldric didn't just lose his family, he lost his grip on reality. According to surviving records from the nearby monastery of St. Methode, Count Aldric became obsessed with the idea that death was simply a construction problem. He believed that if he could build something that existed in both the world of the living and the world of the dead, he could retrieve his family from beyond the veil. So he began his impossible project. Every morning at sunrise, Aldric would begin construction, but he wasn't using traditional materials. Historical accounts describe how he would dig up graves from miles around, collecting bones, teeth, hair, anything that had once been part of a living human being. He developed a technique of mixing these remains with what he called sorrow mortar, a substance that witnesses described as black, viscous, and warm to the touch, despite being kept in cold storage. The most chilling detail comes from a confession letter written by Brother Francois, a monk who was forced to assist Aldric after the Count threatened to burn down the monastery. Brother Francois described how the bones would arrange themselves once placed in position, how the structure seemed to grow rather than being built, and how the walls would sometimes bleed a thick, dark substance that smelled of decay and despair. But the truly horrifying part wasn't the construction, it was what happened at night. As the sun set, witnesses reported that the castle walls would begin to tremble, then shake violently, before suddenly collapsing inward. But instead of creating a pile of rubble, the entire structure would dissolve into a fine grey dust that would blow away in the wind, leaving only the foundations and a sickly sweet smell that lingered. Until dawn, what made this phenomenon even more disturbing was that Count Aldric never seemed discouraged by the nightly collapse. Every morning, he would return with fresh grave-robbing spoils and begin the construction anew. Local records indicate he maintained this routine for 37 years until his death in 1250-5. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Aldric's obsession didn't die with him. His nephew, Marcus de Montmorency, inherited the land and continued the grotesque tradition. Then Marcus's son, then his son's son. For nearly 2.5 centuries, each generation of the Montmorency family would spend their entire adult lives building this impossible castle by day and watching it crumble by night. The monastery records provide disturbing insights into how this affected the family lineage. Each generation became more unstable than the last. Marcus was known to speak to empty air as if conversing with invisible people. His son, Guillaume, was reported to eat nothing but dirt and bone marrow for the last 10 years of his life. Daughter, Isabel, was found one morning dancing naked in the castle ruins, her body covered in bite marks that appeared to be self-inflicted by the 15th century. The Monmouty family had become something barely human. The last heir, a man known only as LeFou the Madman, was described by contemporary accounts as more skeleton than flesh, with eyes that had turned completely black and hands that were permanently stained grey from handling the bone mortar. But the most disturbing aspect of this whole saga wasn't the castle itself, it was what happened to the surrounding area. Over the course of 2 centuries, every cemetery within 50 miles had been systematically emptied. Thousands upon thousands of corpses had been unearthed and used as building materials. The local population lived in constant fear, not just of having their own graves desecrated, but of what would happen when the Monmouty family ran out of bodies to harvest. According to the final entry in the St. Medard Monastery Chronicles, dated March 15, 1455, that question was answered in the most horrifying way possible. On that date, LeFou completed his final construction using the bones of his own family members, whom he had systematically murdered and dismembered over the previous winter. His wife, his 3 children, his elderly parents, all became part of his grotesque architectural vision. But something different happened that night. Instead of collapsing as it had for over 2 centuries, the castle remained standing. The walls held firm through the night, and when dawn broke, witnesses reported that the structure had somehow grown taller, more elaborate, more terrible. For the first time in the castle's history, it had survived until morning. LeFou was found that dawn, sitting in the castle's great hall, surrounded by the echoing voices of what witnesses described as 1,000 tormented souls. He was still alive, but his body had begun to transform into the same grey dust that the castle had become every night for centuries. Over the course of 7 days, he slowly dissolved while conscious, his screams echoing from within the castle walls. On the 7th day, both LeFou and the castle vanished simultaneously. Not collapsed, not crumbled, simply gone. The only thing left was a perfectly circular patch of barren earth where nothing has grown for over 500 years. Modern archaeological surveys of the site have revealed something that defies explanation. Ground-penetrating radar shows a massive underground structure directly beneath where the castle once stood, a mirror image of the surface building, but inverted, extending deep into the earth. Soil samples from the site contain a concentration of calcium phosphate consistent with human bone, but also an unknown mineral compound that doesn't match any element on the periodic table. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came in 1993, when a team of French archaeologists attempted to excavate the site. After digging just 3 feet below the surface, they began to hear sounds, whispers, sobbing, and what one team member described as the sound of construction work being performed by invisible hands. The excavation was abandoned after the lead archaeologist, Dr. Marie Dubois, suffered a complete psychological breakdown. In her final report, before being committed to a psychiatric facility, she wrote, "The castle isn't gone, it's still being built. Every day, every night, for eternity. And every soul that was used in its construction is trapped there, forced to build and rebuild their own prison forever." The site remains cordoned off by the French government, officially classified as geologically unstable. But locals in the nearby village of Montclair still report strange phenomena. Every sunrise, for just a few minutes as the first light hits the empty field, some claim to see the ghostly outline of massive walls rising from the ground, and every sunset, they hear the sound of stones crashing down. Even though nothing visible stands there, the story of Chateau Ephemer serves as more than just a tale of medieval madness. It's a reminder that human obsession, when combined with grief and desperation, can create horrors that transcend the natural world. The Monmouty family's 2-century quests to build a bridge between life and death ultimately created something far worse than either a eternal limbo where neither peace nor resolution could ever be found. So the next time you pass an empty field or abandoned lot, remember the story of the castle that wouldn't stay built. Because sometimes, the most terrifying structures are the ones we can't see. The ones that exist in the spaces between our world and whatever lies beyond. And sometimes, just sometimes, those invisible walls are still being built by hands that should have been at rest centuries ago. The question that haunts historians to this day isn't whether the Chateau Ephemère was real. To many documented sources confirm its existence. The question is whether it ever truly stopped being built, or if somewhere, in some realm between life and death, the Montmorty family is still gathering bones, still mixing mortar with tears, still trying to construct their impossible bridge between worlds, forever trapped in their own architectural nightmare. And perhaps that's the most terrifying thought of all, that some obsessions are so powerful, they can outlast not just death, but time itself.